My, oh my, do we have a feel-good story to begin the day with. It's always a good day when we see a bunch of sanctimonious, privileged virtue signalers getting completely owned in front of the entire world. The U.S. women's soccer team, of course, got crushed by Sweden after taking the knee for BLM. So in this video, we're going to take a look at the humiliating loss suffered by the woke warriors on the U.S. women's team, why the IOC has begun to ban public displays of fidelity to BLM, and stick with me to the end of this video where we're going to hear one of the most beautiful and inspiring testimonies to the virtues of patriotism ever. You're not going to want to miss this. Greetings, everyone. Dr. Steve here with you. Wonderful to be with you. As always, we are your daily fake news antidote. As each and every day, we provide patriotic analysis to help you to think better so you can feel better in these crazy and turbulent times. So if you haven't already done so, you know what to do. Make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button. Before we begin here, let's give a huge shout out to the sponsor of this video. You're going to love this one. It's called The Light Bug. The Light Bug is a portable solar-powered ultra-bright floodlight that makes blackouts a thing of the past. It's solar-powered, so it never needs batteries, and it's perfect to light up your fishing, your hiking, your camping trips because it's so lightweight and portable. And if you click on that link below right now, right this very second, you're going to get yours at 20% off. So don't wait. Make sure to click on that link below or head on over to lightbug.com and get your emergency backup light today. All right, gang, let's dive right in here. If this doesn't awaken your inner schadenfreude, I don't know what will. The U.S. women's soccer team, led by the ultra-left-wing activist Megan Rapinoe, suffered a humiliating defeat at the hands, or perhaps better, the feet, of the Swedish team at the opening game of the Tokyo Olympics, officially ending their 44-game winning streak. Now, this defeat was made all the more sweet given the public displays of wokeness that the women's soccer team have become rather infamous for. The women's team began the match with a demonstration of their fidelity to cultural Marxism and BLM by taking the knee. Of course, they weren't alone in doing this, and this despite the fact that Olympic rules ban their official media from showing such rituals of wokeness, either through videos or the posting of pictures. So our women's soccer team decided, instead of showing their patriotism and their gratitude to the nation that gave them this amazing opportunity, they decided to deride and mock and ridicule our nation instead. But alas, the joke was on them, for that gesture of taking the knee ended up being symbolic of the rest of the game. The U.S. women were utterly humiliated by Sweden. They were completely shut out of the game. They looked confused. They looked bewildered. You know, you might say they looked a lot like Joe Biden out there.
We should be in a position where you are. Why can't the experts say we know that this virus is in fact it's going to be, or excuse me, we know why all the drugs.
Yeah, well, that pretty much sums up how the women played here. Now, unfortunately, the U.S. women's soccer team has garnered quite the reputation for being a bunch of resentful and rude SJWs. You may recall how they recently caused controversy after videos showed several of them facing away from a 98-year-old World War II veteran playing the national anthem on his harmonica. Now, some of the members of the lineup turned to look to the side instead of forward at the war veteran. And that posture looked eerily reminiscent of what the ultra-leftist BLM activist Gwen Berry did just days before in her blatantly disrespectful gesture towards the national anthem, which she claimed was racist. By the way, if you want a nice, succinct debunking of such BLM propaganda regarding our national anthem, you'll definitely want to check out my video on Gwen Berry utterly humiliating herself by demonstrating her own total historical imbecility and ignorance. But the women's team was brutally scorned for what appeared to be a similar insult, which of course unleashed a torrent of weaponized fact checkers categorically denying that the women did anything of the sort. This was just a bunch of right-wing websites trying to slander these socially conscious athletes who are completely beyond reproach, these paragons of virtue, or better, virtue signaling. And the obvious response to all that is, you know, call me crazy, but if you leftist activists didn't spend so much time publicly disrespecting the flag and the national anthem, we wouldn't be in this mess in the first place, would we?
Logical.
We're not the only ones who find these public displays of national resentment nauseating. The IOC, or the International Olympic Committee, has in fact banned podium protests at both the Tokyo Olympics and Beijing Winter Games after 2/3 of the athletes polled said that they believed it was not appropriate to demonstrate or express political views on the victory podium or field of play or at official ceremonies. And by the way, that includes any and all BLM paraphernalia and symbols. So the IOC finds these displays pretty reprehensible as well. And such bans are only further agitating the woke virtue signalers on U.S. teams. The ever-insufferable LeBron James, perhaps the single most pampered and privileged athlete on the planet, slammed the ban, saying there was an attempt at, quote, silencing athletes. The ban is preventing athletes to speak freely, and it thwarts so-called athletic empowerment. No, James, the ban is actually just a sad testimony that civic virtue and gratitude have died at the hands of privileged leftists like yourself. And that, my friends, is what I see as really the big takeaway from all of this. Now, this, of course, goes way beyond a bunch of self-congratulatory, narcissistic virtue signalers getting crushed for all the world to see. Yes, that was certainly sweet for sure. But what the real takeaway in all this is the sad fact that the epidemic of wokeness really does destroy any semblance of gratitude and patriotic appreciation necessary for a nation to thrive. The great classical philosopher Alistair MacIntyre put it beautifully when writing about the virtues of patriotism. He said this: I understand the story of my life in such a way that's part of the history of my family, or this farm, or this university, or this countryside. And I understand the story of the lives of other individuals around me is embedded in the same larger stories, so that I and they share a common stake in the outcome of that story and in what sort of story it both is and is to be. Tragic, heroic, comic. A central contention of the morality of patriotism is that I will obliterate and lose a central dimension of the moral life if I do not understand the enacted narrative of my own individual life as embedded in the history of my country. For if I do not understand it, I will not understand what I owe to others, or what others owe to me. For what crimes of my nation I'm bound to make reparation. For what benefits to my nation I am bound to feel gratitude. What MacIntyre is saying there is that without patriotism, without a deep connection to and love for one's own country, it's virtually impossible to live a fulfilling moral life. And that's because, in effect, you've cut yourself off from the national narrative that awakens empathy and sympathy for, and indeed a devotion to the people around you. That's what patriotism is ultimately about. It's ultimately about cultivating a love for our neighbor. And when you accost and jeer and slander your national narrative, when you accuse your nation of being systemically racist and unjust, you unravel the very basis by which we are morally bound to our neighbor. This is why these social justice warriors can claim to be defenders of the oppressed and downtrodden while simultaneously deriding and denouncing anyone who disagrees with them. They protest against the flag, and then they're shocked when audiences protest them. It reminds me of how a bunch of Major League Soccer players reacted recently to their fans in Texas booing them when they kneeled during the national anthem. They actually had the gall to slam their fans. They slammed the audience. One kneeling player was so enraged that he actually came out and said that the booing was disgusting and disgraceful. I mean, think about that. You're actually calling your fans disgusting and disgraceful when you were the one dishonoring and disrespecting our national symbols, our flag, our national anthem, for which hundreds of thousands have died defending so that you can have your pampered professional career. This is the epitome of virtue signaling. This is the kind of absurdity that wokeism produces, a disdainful resentment towards the very customs and indeed the very people that patriotism calls on all of us to honor and revere. So we'll no doubt continue to see shameless and narcissistic examples of virtue signaling on display in the Olympics. But let us all resolve that as they turn their backs on our nation and its symbolism, we should all, every one of us, turn our backs on them. Now, before you go, you will definitely want to check out my latest video on a shock poll that's just come out showing more Americans want to secede than ever. You're not going to want to miss this, so make sure to click on the link and I'll see you over there.